Chelmsley Wood is just a big housing estate, and in one sense, I guess they're right, it is a big housing estate. There's a lot of houses here, a lot of people live here. But it's a place with a story and a history, and it may not be as exciting as some places, but it's important nonetheless. And as humans and nature has kind of lived here and the landscapes changed in and around the area, there's a story that has grown here. And there is one particular story about the beginnings of Chelmsley Wood, because Chelmsley Wood wasn't always called Chelmsley Wood. The oldest name we've got for it is Chelemund's Hay. And Chelemund's Hay, it's a bit strange I know, but it means the enclosure of Chelemund, which basically means Chelmund's field. So I'm going to tell you the story of Chelmund, how Chelmund first came to be here. Now it's a very old story because it would have taken place, I don't know, 1,000 years ago, possibly. And the story of Chelmund begins with a Saxon warrior. He would have been known as Chelemund at that point, but we just call him Chelmund now because that's the way the name evolved. So it all began about 1,000 years ago with a Saxon warrior called Chelmund. Now Chelmund was a warrior descended from the Saxons, and he would have travelled up and down the country. He was a travelling warrior, a sword for hire, and he would have travelled the country looking for a fight. He loved a scrap, did Chelmund, and he would have travelled up and down this road here, which is the Chester Road, up and down the country as he moved around looking for things to do, people to fight. Now the Chester Road is an ancient road. It's as old as the Romans actually. It's built on an old Roman road, and it's a road that would have been used by millions and millions of people, the road that we use today. And Chelmund would travel around the country working, fighting, settling. I mean, he had got married to a woman called Abby, and sometimes she'd travel with him, sometimes she'd stay in her kind of home village. But eventually, as Chelmund travelled up and down the country, he grew to love this particular corner, because here in this woodland were bluebells, was peace, and a river ran through it, the River Cuttle actually. And if you came here in spring, as we know if we live here, the bluebells would carpet the ground, and it was a wonderful place. And as Chelmund travelled, he thought, now there is a place it would be good to settle when the fighting's over. And of course, the years do roll by, and Chelmund himself grew tired of fighting and war and hurt. He got tired of being injured himself. He got tired of seeing the results of all that fighting. And Chelmund decided the day had come when he was going to pack it all in. So he gathered all of his stuff, him and Abby, and they travelled down the spine of the country, down the old Chester Road, to the place that would eventually become known as Chelmsley Wood. So Chelmund and Abby travelled, and then they settled in the place that we now know as Chelmsley Wood. At that time it was just a stop off on an old Roman road, just a corner in the Forest of Arden. But it was a beautiful spot, as it is still today, if you've got the eyes to see it. Ancient trees, in the spring a carpet of bluebells. A river kind of rustled its way through the forest. It's a wonderful place. So Chelmund and Abby settled, and they did what all settlers do. He started to clear the land so it was ready, so it was a good place for him to live. He started clearing trees, putting up fences, tilling the land. Now they thought they were alone. They thought they were the only ones here. They thought this was clear land. In a sense they were right, because they were certainly the only humans that were there. But there were others there. Things that were just a bit different to them. Because in the trees and the hedges, in the riverbanks, and even in the water itself, there were eyes watching as Chelmund felled trees, as he put up fences, as he cleared undergrowth. They watched, and they were not happy. Because living in and amongst all of the greenery around him were creatures that became known as woodlings. They had a different name for themselves. And these woodlings were creatures of the earth. They were all kinds, large and small, some as big as a leaf, and they flitted about. Some, if you saw them, you just thought they were just a tree stump, just an old tree. And many in between. And they flew and they skittered and they crawled and they slithered and they swam and they burrowed. They were everywhere. Life of the forest. And these creatures had lived here for centuries. And as they watched Chelmund and Abby prepare the land, take down their trees, put up fences around their land, understandably, they were not happy at all. And soon, trouble would begin. Things have been going really well, you know. Chelmund had settled. Him and Abby had built their home. They'd cleared the land. Things were good. They'd had children even, Odric and Emma. They'd settled in well, but things weren't quite right. They couldn't quite put their finger on it, but it was as though somewhere in the woods there was trouble lurking. He had a sense all the time of being watched. And then things kind of got worse, because the milk would turn sour. Buckets would be turned over in the night. Fences he built would be tipped down. The animals would all escape. Crops would fail. It was as though he'd upset some spirit in the place. Because Chelmund didn't know. Chelmund didn't know about the woodlings. And the woodlings didn't really know about Chelmund. They just wondered, who was this person who was here? And this started to go on. After the first couple of years, well, it's all right. You know, it was slow. But Chelmund kept clearing land. The woodlings got angrier and angrier. And Chelmund himself got angrier and angrier. Until finally, one day he returned to a field, to one of the enclosures. The fences had all gone. The animals had run for it. And Chelmund said, "That is enough." And he determined to find out what was going on. So he started exploring, he started looking around. And where we had busy roads and houses, there was still lots of woodland. And Chelmund started to watch. And he had this seething anger. He was really cross. And he saw the woodlings. He started to notice them. Started to notice the way they moved about. These things that just looked like twigs that moved, like leaves. These small figures that in the distance just looked like a tree stump. He started to realise that there was something going on. These woodlings inhabited the wood. And he got more annoyed. And he got angrier and angrier. And in the end, he decided, I'm going to drive these things out. These things are ruining my life. everything I've built. So what he did was he got in touch with his friends. You know, Chelmund had some pretty tough friends. He was an ex-fighter himself. So he got in touch with all of his other Saxon warriors and he says, meet me on this day in this place because there's gonna be a big fight. It was the night before the big fight. Chelmund had had enough. He'd gathered his friends from up and down the country. All the Saxon warriors had gathered. And they were getting ready for a fight. Now they knew not everyone would make it through the fight. So what they did, like all good Saxons, is they sat round a fire and they ate and they drank and they told stories and they shared a good time. Because who knows what tomorrow would bring. And as they sat, they drank this drink called mead. Now mead is a drink the Saxons had, which is a kind of a honey wine. And they sat drinking it and telling stories, remembering the old days. But they weren't alone. Because there, in the shadows, just beyond the firelight, the woodlings. And they were listening. They had stories of their own, the woodlings did. But they listened. And they watched to see what was happening. They watched their enemies. And as they saw them, they saw they were drinking this funny drink. And they'd never come across mead before. All they ever drank was dew, or the drink from the river. That was it. And one of them, she looked carefully around her. And when they were distracted, she ran in, grabbed a small cask of mead, and ran out with it again. And she said, look, they've been drinking this. What is it? They seem to like it. And she tried some. And then another woodling tried some. And another woodling. And before you know it, they'd all tried it. And they said, you know, perhaps these people, different as they are from us, perhaps they're onto something. We like this. So as Chelmund and his friends talked into the night of battle and of glory, so the woodlings talked into the night. And they discussed, and they planned, and they decided what they would do come the sunrise, come the day of the big fight. It was the day of the fight. No one knew which way it was going to go. Chelmund and his Saxon warrior friends on one side and the woodlings on the other. And they gathered in the clearing, in the woods, where they knew the fight would happen. And as the sun rose, Chelmund and his friends stood at one end of the clearing. The woodlings started to appear out from the trees at the other end, large and small, smooth and rough. All the colours of spring, summer, autumn and winter were there. But the woodlings had another plan. Chelmund was set for a fight. Chelmund was armed and dangerous. But then the woodlings talked. They talked amongst themselves, and then one of them came forward to the middle of the clearing and gestured. Chelmund came forward as well, and they met. and they talked. And the woodling said, "Why are we fighting? There's land here for everyone." Chelmund says, "Well, this is my land, I've claimed it. I've always been living here. One way or another, I've travelled this land. This is my land. I was born here." And the woodling said, "Well, that's the same for us. We were born here. This is our land. These are our homes too." And the woodling says, "Fighting isn't going to solve anything. We'll fight you, you'll fight us. One of us will win. But then a bit later, the other one will come back and fight again. And so it will go on. There will be no peace. Let's learn to live together," said the woodling. "Let's make arrangements. Let's make agreements where we can live in harmony on this land that we share." Well, Chelmund was very happy because he was all set for a fight. But he thought about it and he realised that actually this was the only way ahead. The only way they could all live was to live in peace. Well, the woodling says, "Well, there is a catch." And now Chelmund was like, "Well, what is it?" And the woodling said, every year, we want 21 barrels of mead as rent." Chelmund thought about this. "Seems reasonable," he said, and the agreement was made. So Chelmund went back to his fighters at the end of the enclosure and told them what had happened. Though some of them weren't very happy because some of them wanted a fight. Some of them were only there for the trouble. But Chelmund said, "That's not going to be the way now. We want this to be a place of peace, where we can work together, where we can share our skills, where there can be harmony here." Some of them went off, the others stayed, and Chelmund and the woodlings, from that point on, lived in harmony. So that's the story of Chelmund. If you live in Chelmsley Wood, you'll know that we used to have a famous sculpture called the Bogey on a Stick. We've still got the stick. Unfortunately, the bogey has vanished. But the story of Chelmund is our story. It's a story of how people settle in a place. And it's a story of how people learn to get along, how to live in harmony, despite their differences. And it's a strange story in many respects. And it's a story that if it happened today, you hope things would be different. But it teaches us a bit about community. And it also teaches us that there's more going on, that in this world around us, there's things happening. There's a deeper layer of reality going on. And we would do well to take notice of that. In the trees and in the ground beneath our feet, the wood still slumbers. And we may think, well, it's all just concrete now. It's all just blocks and buildings. Well, they're there too, but we need to learn to live in balance with our environment and with the whole of creation. So walk around, keep your eyes open, because you never know what you might see, and you never know who you might be able to make friends with.